Thanks, Bob.
What are you thanking me for? Thank you. That's been great. You guys did a fantastic job. Well, I just slobbered all over you to Amy, so I hope that helped. Yeah. She seems okay. Yeah. Okay. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Safe travels. Okay. Is this thing on? Okay. Is this thing on now? Yes, there we go. Maybe everybody could sit down. Maybe. I hate to interrupt people's free expression, but I do want to get you out of here on time. Sorry, everybody over there who's enjoying coffee and talk, there'll be plenty of time for coffee, talk, and maybe even some liquor afterwards if you want to sit down. Come on, let's go. We just wanted to, well, first I think I want to say thank you to the survivors of this conference. So thank you all for still being here. Some people have a legitimate excuse like an airplane, and some people are tired, and some people are touring Budapest. And so we won't keep you past 5:30. If we do, stand up and walk out. But Kate and I wanted to close the conference with a few words about what we've heard and where we're going, and where you think we should be going. But the first thing that we wanted to do was to hear very briefly from each of the people who led the workshops that we just finished with, the breakout sessions. So why don't we start? Who's ready? Cynthia, are you ready? Okay, we'll start with Cynthia, who led the session on the cat and mouse game between bloggers and government.
So we talked a lot about the most prominent challenges facing activists and bloggers in doing their work. And these are some of the main takeaways that I got from the session, but there were many, many great ideas that obviously we don't have time to discuss fully. First, building communities and hubs of bloggers across a country or region is very important so that bloggers can better support each other and better organize to amplify their messages. And outside, more institutionally focused civil society groups can play a role in building these communities, especially with funding and especially with countries without local groups that can fill that role. But of course, such funding must respect the autonomy of the blogging community itself. Second, arrests and physical intimidation are still very big challenges for bloggers and activists. And again, institutional civil society organizations, traditional media, and legal assistance can play a big role in bringing international attention to these cases. But there is some concern that these more institutional groups only focus on certain parts of the world, and the focus needs to broaden. And finally, companies can play a big role in enabling activism online. First, on the kind of impact mitigation side, companies should be more transparent to users about when and how user privacy could be compromised. And on the more proactive side, companies should start building their tools in ways that are more responsive to the needs of activists, and also speak out against governmental attacks against bloggers when they see them. So.
Okay, that's a terrific summary. Does anybody have an immediate comment to what you've just heard from Cynthia? Anybody who is in that breakout who wants to say something right away?
And there is a microphone there.
And here, if anybody wants this one, you're welcome to it. Okay, let's move on. Rex, are you ready there? Okay. And why don't you say which breakout you did?
All right, thank you, Robert. We did cybersecurity and national security, and building on the excellent last panel led by Professor Price, we didn't spend a lot of time on the pure freedom of expression rules issues, but we did try to move it up to the international institutional level, and recognizing obviously that the more authoritarian states are in a pretty bad trend in how they leverage infrastructure, new technologies, best practices to clamp down on freedom of expression. And we also recognized our first point at the extreme end of the cybersecurity spectrum, that the world is on the cusp of a global cyber arms race, and in order to remedy that that potential dilemma debacle to work towards a concrete legislative agenda, both domestically and internationally, that would halt this cyber arms race before it spins out of control. And then secondly, we discussed the mix of people perspectives at this forum, from business, government, education, NGOs, activists, and what could be done to continue this conversation. And we more or less also looked at the division in the international security sphere of what we call the net heads, most of us, and the securocrats, which there are a few of here, perhaps. And to look at the future, which a big part of the discussion focused on China and Asia-Pacific region. And so the proposal from the group was that Google consider hosting Internet at Liberty Hong Kong to broaden the discussion to another
All right,
part of the
who was
world.
talking to Sharon Hum? Because Sharon already tried that one on me. Let me just say one thing, that I'm not fond of the cyber war terminology, and we've been involved in some conversations in Washington recently about the terminology because it gets you to a certain place where it indicates there's an offense and there's a defense. And in any case, this is a piece of the cybersecurity argument that I think we all have some work to do on, which is actually, how do you talk about it? Because is it in fact just a government military thing, or is it really an economic war? Isn't that really underlying a lot of what's going on here? Go ahead.
Well, and it highlights winners and losers, right?
Just on that point, since I'm the only representative from Chatham House invoking our rule, we will have a report coming out in November that will attempt to define cyber warfare as we see it. We recently hosted Howard Schmidt. We haven't spoken to his counterpart, Mike McConnell, who promoted the concept, but we hope to contribute at least a working definition of what real warfare might be, as opposed to conflict and criminality.
Okay. Christina, next.
So I'd like to report back from the workshop on freedom of expression and protecting privacy. And we started the workshop by exploring our data shadows. First, we were trying to visualize our public data shadows, so information that everybody could find about us when Googling a name or an individual or looking up profiles that are available. And then also the more hidden data shadows that are with companies and with government if they are using lawful interception. And after having this all on our whiteboard, we were discussing what is actually our expectation of privacy. What do we want? Yeah? If we just start from the scratch, what do citizens want? In the next step, we were discussing the legal safeguards against interception and against state interference with our data, especially also in the light of the recent development that most of our private data will go into the cloud, that it will be not anymore stored on our own hardware, but that we are using, that we are outsourcing basically data storage to service providers, and whether there are enough sufficient safeguards against interference by various actors, government in particular. From that, we were moving to the wide field of privacy by design and how we can infuse more privacy into technology already in the initial phase of designing this technology, and what is the right definition of privacy by design. It's not just more security, more encryption. It also entails less data, using less data, collecting less data, storing it a less amount of time. And we were also discussing other safeguards like a privacy impact assessment for governments and for private companies, transparent, making these privacy impact assessments transparent, having data audits, security audits for companies that are handling personal data. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, you know that we already knew exactly what you discussed, because Google monitors everything that you discussed. It's a very interesting conversation to have about privacy tools, especially in the cloud. I think that people who are watching this conversation carefully will notice that there's more and more discussion about how you keep the cloud safe. Just yesterday, we introduced a new tool for businesses that use our apps in the cloud, which requires essentially a double verification. We've come to the conclusion that a username and a password is not enough. And so now for people who are using our apps, they have to also get a code that changes constantly from their mobile phone in order to get onto their to the platform. So I think you'll see a lot of discussion in this area as we move along.
Yeah, basically, one of the conclusions I want to add is that we have tools, yeah? That users have tools that are easy and plug in their standard software and in their devices, and that this way they get more empowered to manage their privacy, and such tools is one example you provided, but there are many more. But they must be really handy and easy to use.
Okay, who's left? Oh, sorry, Marcos. There you are.
So we were given the charge of looking at ethics and accountability on the internet, and we had a very lively session. And we started out by looking at 4 institutional means by which we would try to achieve these ethics and accountability for governments and for corporations. The first was through traditional media, journalism. The second was through corporations themselves, whether it was self-regulating or otherwise. The third was the engagement of government and the traditional regulatory regimes that legislatures and judicial branches offer. And then the fourth was really the civil society sector, and that includes non-governmental organizations and non-profit type organizations. And I'm actually going to bring up Aaron, who also was with me because he did such a good job of summarizing the end of our session, which, as I say, was quite lively.
Yeah, so we had a lot of kind of constructive criticisms of existing groups in both corporations and governments. But when it came to positive suggestions, I think they can kind of be synthesized into 2 large points. One is that it's incumbent upon us to find narratives and outrage moments that really communicate the issues we're talking about, and then can galvanize a larger movement and bring together a coalition of all the groups who care about these things, but haven't had the sort of mass support, who haven't been able to break through the noise and explain these to other people. The second is that we need to start thinking about the world we want to have, the world of, a sort of internet governance, whether those are principles or organizations or structures, frameworks, all of the tools that we're kind of groping towards, but something that we can fight for when we do have these movements, a sort of dream that we should be able to try and achieve with the structures that we're building.
And then the final part of this, to at least use this moment of Google having brought us together with the Central European University, is to create some form of feedback loop, whether it be something online or some other thing. We didn't necessarily talk about another conference, but we certainly talked about how do we then bring best practices and the learning that we all have and the connections we've made at this conference back to share with each other and with you.
As much fun as I've had, the last thing I want to think about this afternoon is another conference. Sorry. We're going to show a few slides here that just have some thoughts that came to some folks who were taking notes and thinking over the course of the last few days. I trust you all can read the slides. If you have bad eyes, please move up to the front. I'm not going to read out the slides, unlike happens at a lot of conferences, because I think that's really boring. But what I want to do now is solicit ideas from all of you in the audience, either reaction to some of these or comments of your own. And I'm going to start by calling on Rebecca McKinnon, who has been out reporting, as was her former life, and asking people what they made of the conference and what kind of suggestions they have for moving forward.
I have very kind of random scribbled notes here, but I've been out just sort of asking people for their reaction and getting a sense of what's been working for people. And one of the questions that's come up from a number of people is just the question of, why Google convened this at all, and you have explained it, but there's still a lot of question marks looming around the room, and sort of what you hope to do with this going forward in terms of, this is clearly Google's coming out in support of civil society and in support of activism for free expression, but is sort of, what does Google intend to do next in terms of supporting further discussions, further solutions? I guess there were some questions.
Can I interrupt there then,
sure.
maybe just for a second? Obviously, many motivations for pulling you all together. One of the motivations was that as I've been, involved in this for 4 years, and I know, not a technologist, so, I was brought in because I supposedly know something about policy. But I've noticed that there are gatherings in this world of technologists. There are gatherings of activists. There are gatherings of government people in small groups behind closed doors. And one of the things that we really wanted to do was bring everybody together and hopefully get started some new conversations that haven't happened before. Another thing that we wanted to do was to bring people from different parts of the world. I smarted slightly earlier when somebody said that they noticed that there hadn't been too many people from other parts of the world. There were a lot of Western Europeans and Americans here talking. And I'm sorry if that's the impression, because we really did try to recruit a lot of people from the Middle East, from the CIS, from Africa, from Latin America. We tried very hard to bring together, and obviously a lot of people from Eastern Europe.
If I could just clarify on that, because we were talking about this, I was talking about it with some people after the break, because in essence, I think it's fair, I think a piece of it is actually fair critique, but it's a different kind of, I was interpreting it as a different kind of critique, because I think if you look around at who's in the room, it's incredibly diverse, and I think, I think Google and Bob and through the different networks that we've been trying to reach out with I think this is a really incredible group of people, obviously can always be more diverse. Where I think the distinction is that if you look around, people that are from beyond Europe are coming more from a civil society and an activist background, and what is missing are government representatives from outside of Europe. And to that, obviously we needed to do better. We need to try harder on that. But we did actually try, and I think that is quite telling, even within the Central European frame, if I can throw that out.
Absolutely, and we had, I think we issued 15 to 20 issues for different invitations for different Russian officials to come. And I think we got 0 in the Russian official category. So that's one of the things, and where we go, we can discuss.
Right, yeah, and other reactions that I've been hearing is a common reaction I get at a lot of conferences where people say, the best part is the conversations happening away from the main sessions. And while I think, there were some amazing things said and some really valuable conversations that happened on the stage, so some people were wondering whether there could have been more smaller group formats addressed at solving specific problems or working out solutions or working out plans for projects to move forward. And one of the other thoughts that some people had is that a number of us run into one another a fair amount. Not all of us, but there's a certain group here who see each other in a lot of different conferences. And so the desire to make sure that the same things don't get said over and over again, while
Right.
at the same time there are other people who were not part of those other conversations, so you want to make sure, so that's always a challenge. But on the other hand, people are very excited by the energy and the passion of a lot of people here and the real desire to move forward and actually do something, this not just be a talk shop. And so people were talking a lot about, okay, what do we do next? How do we keep the linkages between the people here and move forward on sorting out solutions, sorting out ways that companies can work more closely with civil society, sorting out ways that the relationship between governments and companies can be more transparent and that communities can be more involved. And so how do we move forward towards solutions? And so there's a lot of interest in what next steps might be, whether there's going to be something on your website where people can post concrete suggestions for going forward, whether there might be some perhaps not necessarily public social network where people can kind of interact with one another a bit more and try and organize and follow up on different threads that took place. So that was definitely something that came up. And another thought.
Let me just respond quickly to those two things before I lose my train of thought. The first is on the workshops. I agree. I think we spent perhaps a little bit too much in this time in this tent, as beautiful as it is. And thank you, Peter Sherish, wherever you are, for building the tent and holding it together. Thank you, Peter. I think I said it at the beginning of the conference that this was a vacant lot 5 weeks ago. So very impressive job. I would think that more workshops is a great idea. I think that the atmosphere in the Monday workshops in particular was terrific, and that the breakouts came a little late, perhaps. The dinners last night, I think people enjoyed. It was a little loud, perhaps, to completely hear everybody, but the idea, I think, was in the right area. In terms of carrying on, we do, and on the last slide, if you want to go forward, we will ask people to contribute via the website. We're going to put up the address here. I would say that's not it. There it is there. If you could send us your comments, we'll have some kind of a form on that where you can say, I like this, I didn't like that about the conference. But more important, we hope to establish what I've been calling a discussion and action forum on that website. So we turn the current conference website into something that can go on. And so people can gather together virtually and discuss topics, whether it's intermediary liability, or whether it's certain parts of privacy or cybersecurity or the topic of your choice, because there have been contacts made here, issues raised that I think are very interesting, and the cross-cultural nature of the discussion has been really important, and I want to see people continue that. So if that's a partial answer to your question.
And can I just add, with my Central European University hat on, as a space for research and teaching and knowledge exchange, this is something that we take very seriously, and it's this conference is a huge step in that direction to do even more in this area. And one of the things that we're talking about is something that would be like a virtual think tank to link together, building on this conference and building on some of these networks that would involve universities, you know, and other media and internet centers. Also, we're talking about perhaps doing a summer school that would build on the kind of stuff that was being done in the workshop. So definitely, this is something you'll hear more about from us as well. And of course, you know, a lot of this work is already going on, and all of you have been doing this for a long time as well. So we hope to at least, you know, take some kind of step in the direction of making sure that more people get to know about the different stuff that's already going on, as well as developing new things.
And then one more thing I'll report, and then leave it to others to talk. But just again, reporting honestly and not wanting to you know, detract from the fact that it's been a great few days. But I did also hear from a few people about the framing. To quote my colleague and friend Ivan Segal, if he's around, his observation was, you know, the internet is not a subject, it's an object. And there were some of the panels that treated it, you know, is the internet this or that? And the question was that really the most constructive framing? Because again, it's really a question about, you know, what are we doing to the internet rather than how we define the internet, because, you know, it seemed to people, and I think the reason why most people came here was because they're interested in action rather than just interested in, you know, characterizing what the internet is. And so that was one thought. And then one other thought about framing, and of course, not all the panels were that way, but there were some panels that were framed in that way. And those were perhaps the panels that people found least helpful, even though some very passionate and excellent things were said in all the panels. But
you don't have to backpedal there,
yeah,
it's okay.
But I don't want to detract from, I mean, some individuals said some very important things in all of the panels. So I don't want to diminish that. But one other thing about the framing had to do with, there's some participants from the developing world felt that maybe it was an excessively Western framing to some of the issues. And that it became more difficult to raise points or kind of intervene in some of the conversations from non-Western perspectives because of the framing. And so, again, you know, this is one of the big challenges with organizing a conference is sort of how do you solicit enough kind of ideas about the framing before choosing the framing and so on. And again, coupled with the whole question of sort of what is the objective of the conversation in the first place. And so this is, again, I think everybody is very excited about what happened and would like to see kind of anything that follows on relate to action and change, because that's why everybody's here, is because people do want to see action and change. So with that, I will sit down.
Well, thank you very much, Rebecca. That was very helpful.
And even just to add to the self-critique, breaking it down, because even just the whole topic is the topic of, you know, your next 7 books, or, you know, something like this. So how do we break it down into chunks where we can get to those pieces that you raise? I agree.
Charles, did you have something to say?
Yes, I think you actually partly answered the question about some of the lack of participation from some parts of the world. In particular, I'm of course thinking about China. And actually noting this morning that when you talked about the transparency report, I actually noted that China was not in it because it is illegal to disclose those information in China. Now, of course, there's certainly, I would understand the reason behind it, but sooner or later, if we don't find an alternative to deal with situations like that, then it's going to be illegal all around the world, and there's nothing more you could do. So what are the alternatives of dealing with situations like that, and not, not, let me say, skirt around the issue, only because that government is too powerful and too big or whatever. But we're still actually, of course, I think I gained a lot from listening to the other people around the world, you know, talking about their problems all over the world. But still, China is a big problem. I mean, we're talking about 400 million internet users that are not getting not getting all the information that they should get unless they circumvent. And this is a big problem. And there seem to be, you know, how do we deal with it? Only because that country's government is too powerful? What do we do?
Right, and let me put it this way. Google has had its issues in China.
You have?
And I've done some of the work on the area, and yes, there are lots of dilemmas and as the Chinese would say, contradictions in dealing with the Chinese government and in making sure that we do our utmost to push as hard as we can in order to get information out, in order to give people access to information. On the other hand, I will say this. One of the problems that we experience, and again, this is a Western framework, in particular US framework, is that internet freedom in Washington and elsewhere in the United States has become a China question and a China question only to some extent. It's bled into Iran in the last year and a half. And so one of the things that I like to do as the person who has the portfolio at Google for these issues is to make sure it's not all about China. And I just put that on the table. But in no way do I underestimate the impact, nor want you to get the impression that we're not concerned with our activities there, nor with the 400 million people who deserve access to information, and certainly trying to fix the kinds of things that you noticed with the tools that we have on transparency and government requests. Comments? Come on, this is a very valuable group. Somebody has something to say. Please. Who has a microphone? Let's start over here. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Ferenc Halmer from Budapest University. I have a feeling of a kind of a farewell party. If you are going to be over 45, you are going to have more and more this kind of feeling, actually. So basically I've come to here because I had this idea that probably softwares, users' platforms are going to be the main point, the way they are changing our life, this usual thing. But at the same time, I have this increasing idea that we are not talking about the technology's impact on people or the way people are using technology. We are just talking basically about one thing. And because what we've been talking about, it really shows that our life is now completely undividable from technology. So for instance, as much as Google search has transformed the ecology of the known and the unknown in our life, personally mine, as much I can imagine something like a customized little gadget in newspaper, in journalists' computer, showing that the text they are writing, whether it's in the red or the green or in the yellow zone, in terms of the Google search hits that they are going to generate, or in terms of the income they are going to generate through Google search. So it means that, yes, Google is the matrix, as it's been said many times, yes.
Oh God, I hope not.
But at the same time, I think, yes, we are no longer talking about Google or Web 0.0. We are talking about society 0.0 actually. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bertrand?
Yeah. First of all, thanks a lot for the great opportunity. I just want to highlight a few elements. The first thing is to piggyback on what Rebecca was saying regarding objectivation or subjectivation of the internet. I wonder whether we're not confronted with the problem of a new mutation of the internet, just like the one when it moved from academic to commercial, and it was going through great pains for the communities who were engaged before. It is now becoming a fully political space, and it brings new problems that were not addressed at all in the commercial era, where it was just on the fringe. So I wonder if it is not a growing pain of the internet, as much as an internet remaining the way it is all the time. Regarding the participation of the different regions, I think the explanation is that actually people are coming from different regions here, but they are like-minded. So there's fundamentally, we're gathered because they share a certain vision, either from government or other sides, of a certain vision of defending freedoms of the internet. There's a choice in positioning whether afterwards we want to bring more diverse views, including people who don't agree with what we're putting forward to make the things move forward. And in that respect, I would like to share a final thing. In many cases, before jumping to solutions or even discussing solutions, framing the issue is often more important because it is the prerequisite to get the diversity of actors. Right. And one thing that I take out of this meeting is this sentence of a common issue, which is not an us versus them, it's a common issue. How do we manage in a balanced manner the treatment of hate speech in countries or regions that have strong ethnic, religious, cultural, or political tensions? This is a problem for all countries, and it is bringing the whole question of balance as a we have a problem instead of an us versus them type of thing. But thanks again for the opportunity. Sure.
Hello. I have a two-part comment regarding Google, mostly. We talked last night during the dinners, and one of the things that was said was that Google News does not take any of the blogs, and that's perfectly the way they want to do the policy. But as blogs become more important, is Google going to do anything that would be something like Google News, especially for blogs, where people can go and search the blogs and get more of a citizen journalist point of view than the traditional media? And the second part is, as blogs are becoming more important, having access to these tools that Google provides is very important, putting a two-step verification is very good for people who do have access to cell phones, but many of the Google's products that are outside the cell phones area require that, and downloading or even getting a new Gmail account will lead into a user outside of the United States or many countries where they would get a message that says Google will not be able to send the SMS to this phone number. So that would restrict them from getting the software or downloading or even making a simple Gmail account.
I'm not going to try to create new products on stage here. I'd just rather get reactions from people before we close here. Please.
Thank you. I'm Hungarian, and I'm definitely the second oldest in this crowd. So, first of all, I'd like to say that what I take away from this conference is there is no government powerful enough not to have to take note of this gathering and what's coming up and what's cooking here. So that's really amazing. The second thing is that I have the feeling, and that's really good, and that is something that dovetails with what my French colleague said, is that perhaps we have raised more questions than we have received answers, but I think that's the most important thing. I think raising the questions and posing the questions and clarifying what's wrong and what's right, is that's where we begin. The third thing I want to say is that I had the feeling at times that governments of free countries get too much beating, and reminded me of a joke 30 years ago when Hungary was still a dictatorship, when an American and a Hungarian are talking, and the American says, we're a democracy because we're free to criticize the American president. The Hungarian says, well, then we're a democracy too, because we are also free to criticize the American president. I'd like to say that I owe a great, as a Hungarian, this meeting makes me real proud. I'm so proud as a Hungarian citizen. Now, this meeting is happening here with this great participation, with this amazing group of people. So thank you, Google. Thank you, Central European University, and do come back.
Thank you. Please, thank you.
This is very quick. So could I just get a sense of, could I get raised hands of people who are here from Latin America? So we do have a pretty good representation. And from Africa? Okay, thank you very much. I just, every time someone talks about regions, I wanted to see what it really was. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay. I'm going to put someone on the spot who was up here right at the beginning, and that is Evgeny. And I'm wondering if you're feeling more optimistic or less optimistic at the end of these couple of days.
Do you mean about Google or about something
No,
else?
not about Google, about the internet, about freedom, about all the people in this room and all the good they can do.
You know, I would say I actually feel more pessimistic. Not least because I think a lot of important questions about the future of this as a political space have not been asked. And, you know, I think it is, of course, very exciting to talk about the power of the people and sort of be in this kumbaya moment where, you know, we can all join hands and, you know, campaign together. The problem is that, you know, there are certain forces which I feel are beyond our control at this point, and we do need to start, you know, trying to imagine this space as, you know, a very complex, you know, dimension where governments, both Western and authoritarian ones, would be engaged much more actively. And I'm not sure that the future of this space can only be determined by activists, as much as I would like it to. You know, there are a lot of domestic developments in the US where Google itself is involved in, including debates like net neutrality, which I think would have a huge impact on the future of internet freedom globally. You know, and what happens to net neutrality will determine what will happen to market for deep packet inspection and what happens to the market for deep packet inspection will determine how far China would be able to go in controlling the internet. So I would very much like, whenever you hold future events, to try to bring many of these domestic developments, where Google, by the way, often does not have much to boast of, to light as well, so that we can actually see the level of connection between the domestic discourse and the international discourse, not to get lost in glorifying all the good things that you guys can do.
The good news, Evgeny, is that people from Google are happy to invite anyone to voice their opinions. The bad news is that I'm going to be reviewing your book.
What I was gonna jump in on that is, I think it's both. I mean, if I was thinking to myself as you were asking that question, Bob, I was thinking, well, do I feel more pessimistic or optimistic? And I think it's fair to say both, but I don't know if I'd say pessimistic. I'd just maybe say scared. I mean, I think it feels overwhelming sometimes to think about the challenges that are ahead and the anxieties that are real, and the concerns that need to be addressed, the changes and shifts in power, the many, many different places where power is being distributed and where change has to occur. Again, going back to that first slide, at the level of engaging with companies, engaging with governments, engaging in our own practices, and as activists and human rights workers. And at the same time, I do feel optimistic when I hear and learn about the kinds of things that everybody in this room is doing or thinking about. So I don't think, I'm a Libra, I can't help it. I think it's okay to feel. I think it's okay that it's both. I think if we're only thinking of the optimism, then we're not scared enough, and we can devolve into not enough action. But at the same time, I think it's important that that we acknowledge and look at all the tools and people and spaces where change is happening.
I'm Walid Al-Sakaf. I come from Yemen, and perhaps I'd like to leave a good impression, raising your spirits. I come from a country with very low internet penetration, and one that is one of the lowest in the world. Yet people are really having high hopes in the internet. They've been using internet in a way that's been prescribed perhaps as extreme. So many websites emerging every day. And many of those websites have lots of activism in them. And one of the very important messages that they'd like through me to deliver to you is that you should never lose hope in the Middle East. Middle East is an area with growing tendencies for reform. It's an area that has the highest rate of growth in bandwidth in the world, in terms of use of bandwidth in the world. That's Cisco's numbers. And then there's also the note of freedom. Freedom, liberty, these two words are increasingly getting closer to the hearts and needs of the society there. So this is the note that I'd like to leave, and not to forget that censorship should always remain in the agenda. And I'd love to know, or raise the issue to Google to perhaps coordinate with techies, Arab techies or Middle Eastern techies in the region. They have higher skills than they could even expect. They have lots of potential, and there's also a possibility to set up meetings in Arabic language as well as English, so as to bring those who are not with good English skills together. And to note that very important is that we maintain a very strong link to all the international software developers, not only Google. They all need to have focus on that region and work together for a common good. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Katitsa from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. If I could do one thing to make the internet a better place for free expression, I would like to bring more legal safeguards against government access to citizens' data. And I would like to put the example of the digital due process, when it's a multi-stakeholder coalition where civil society like CLU and CDT and EFF, among others like Microsoft, Google, AT&T, Facebook are joining together to modify and to bring to the 21st century the privacy law in the United States. and give a strong private safeguard to information that is stored in the cloud. And I think that it will be interesting, I'm Peruvian and I came from a developing country too, to see this kind of sort of model in our countries, to see and try to partner with companies and try to influence our governments, to try to reform those laws that are giving not enough protection to our data when government wants to access to that. And I would like to see the enforcement of that. I think it's a good model that it could work, and I would like also to call attention that the Google's transparency tool is good, but not all the companies are giving that information. So I would like to call to Yahoo and Bing and Microsoft to also try to release information. How many data have been requested by governments when they try to access those services, including Facebook too? Thank you. And others.
Is that all you want? Well, we'll take two last comments here.
Okay, João from Brazil. Just to add that I think if we want to go forward, we have to be more connected to the other initiatives, especially the IGF space. And I'm talking also about myself. I'm not talking about the others. Like I haven't been following that closely. And like lots of people here came from IGF, but we didn't have, for instance, any kind of report of what are the main issues, what are how is the debate framed, and I think we have to follow closely these and other initiatives like GNI and etc. And this can lead us to deal more with this discussion of access to internet. I think this is a kind of quite important issue. Like we're talking about very different conditions of access in developed and developing countries. Three times as much as a difference. And I think this is absolutely, it's a need. If you want to talk about freedom and liberties and etc., we have to talk about people having the access effectively to internet. And this passes by discussing and changing the structure of governance that makes actually developing countries pay for developed countries' access, inbound and outbound. Okay. And this is an example of something that we should be aware of. Thank you.
All right. We're going to take 3 more 20-second comments, but I really ask you to be 20 seconds here.
Hi, I'm Jillian York, and actually he sort of just said what I was going to say, but the one thing that I noticed when someone over here asked people to stand up from different continents was that the presence in this room is somewhat reflective of the internet penetration in those regions. And so looking and thinking about access, you know, I mean, I think that is the most important thing, and only then can we answer the rest of the questions.
Bob, I created a hashtag because I was inspired by the conference, which was really great. It's called Bob, We Need to Have a Conversation. And in those 20 seconds, I'd love to sit down with you guys and have a conversation about how possibly to make access to Blogger encrypted, meaning HTTPS, and 2, figuring out ways of handing out IPs to trusted partners in countries where people are actually dying to get your products. Thank you.
Okay. And one more.
Hello. Thanks. I came from Kyrgyzstan, and my comment regarding your question, if I could do one thing to make the internet a better place for free expression, I would build up our discussion on the basis of so-called iron triangle. On one side, civil society, state, and business. I mean, in the beginning you mentioned that it would be great to have decision makers, for example, from CIS countries, because we dreamed a lot about possibilities of internet, but at the same time it would be great to deliver this information to real decision makers in our countries, because developing of internet depends also on our governments. And the last thing, it was great that we had Google, Facebook, BBC, but at the same time, we should attract also other business, banks, companies, where the using of internet is vital. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. before Kate closes us out here, I just wanted to say a few thank yous. First, again, to the crew, to Peter Sherris and the crew who put this facility together and ran it for the last several days. And to the team from CEU, Kate and Ildiko, John Shattuck, and Roxana, and the rest of you, so many congratulations. Of course, my phone is ringing. For what you've done, and thank you very much for your help. And finally, to the speakers and to the moderators and to the participants who stood up and freely expressed yourselves, thank you very much for being here.
And before I move to the final slide, which is some suggestions on this evening, I also, Bob, we just can't thank you enough for everything you've done in putting this together, and your entire team, Darren and everyone there. And this is certainly a unique opportunity and a unique experiment as a university working so closely with a company that's at the center of all this. And hopefully, hopefully everyone here feels like it's been a worthwhile effort. We certainly do, and have just been very impressed and thrilled to be working with you all on this. And thank you, Bob. And just really briefly to thank everyone with the Center for Media and Communication Studies, everyone at CEU, all of the students as well who've been doing all kinds of things behind the scenes. And if we could go to the final slide, please. So speaking of social movements, actually one of the most active social movement here in Budapest is Critical Mass, which some of you may or may not be familiar with, which is a big mobilization to encourage bicycle riding, and different countries do it in different ways. In Hungary, we have 2 a year. The one in April is the big one over the weekend. It gets about 50,000 participants, just to give you an idea of the scale in a city of 2 million. And today is the fall Critical Mass Ride. So if you happen to see a lot of people on bicycles, that's why. It's from 6:30 to 7:30, and I mentioned that it's taking place not along this local, the Karut here, Boise Zielinski, but the big Karut, the Nagy Karut. And then one of the things that happens at the end of this is a ceremonial bike lift. So there should be a good number of a few thousand people out today. And so at 8 o'clock at the Götter Club, which is just down here at Erzsébet tér, and we can show you on maps so you can Google it right later, will be this bike ride. It's also a place where you can sit outside, have a coffee or have a drink. The other thing to mention that's happening this evening is at Köleves kert. Kert means garden. One of the things that is really lovely about this city is that in the summer, even though we're transitioning, all of the available public spaces and non-public spaces, any kind of open space becomes used as kind of a garden cafe or place for people to be outside. So we're just at the end of that season, so you still get to experience some of these places if you're interested. And it's in the District 7, which is only about these places are about a 15-minute walk from here. And a very inexpensive taxi ride if you prefer. So Köleves kert, there's music in celebration of Sukkot, the Jewish Harvest Festival. There'll be music from 8 o'clock on there. And then what we were thinking is people probably, and we encourage you to get out and enjoy some of the city outside of this tent, as lovely as it is. And we thought we'd just kind of pick a meeting point and say, come from this time on, for those of us that like to convene together and have a celebratory drink. We're going to meet from 9 o'clock on at Simpla kert, and Simpla is one of the first of these kind of so-called ruined cafes. So it's it gives you a real sense of Budapest to visit one of these places where abandoned buildings were taken over and kind of reclaimed into public spaces. So it's a nice place, and it's only a block from where the music is at Köleves kert, so you can, split your interest for this evening. There's lots of restaurants all in this neighborhood. I will stop I don't work for the Chamber of Commerce here. I just encourage everybody to enjoy the city as much as you can in these last moments that you have here. Thank you all again on behalf of the Central European University.
here's a painting of a landscape. Now, the artist who painted that picture says something is missing. What is it? It is I myself who was